We're going to talk about how you're Trump's biggest fan.
I should have the MAGA hat. First disclosure, I think the man is a force of nature, an astute businessman, and deserves to be in the White House, received a pretty overwhelming mandate. So for that reason, I respect him enormously. And so Oxwash was built with the fundamental premise of let's take these life support technologies from keeping people alive in space and apply them to textiles, recycle the water, use 100% renewable energy. Some of it's obvious, some of it's proprietary tech we've had to invent. What we've been able to do is build the world's first of a kind industrial laundry plant, and it's completely decarbonized the cleaning process and distribution, which is, a huge breakthrough. It really took until the last 5 years to actually build a person out of parts. I see personally a wave of humanoid embodied AI robots augmenting workforces very quickly. What you see with any new technological wave in history, people think it's going to be the end of the economy and huge waves of work. Exactly. And what you see is that's not the case. The typewriter putting all notaries out of jobs was across the New York Times. The agricultural revolution, the internet, the absolute biggest. I think AI and robotics is just the next one.
Kyle, you're an Oxford PhD, you're an ex-NASA scientist, you worked at SpaceX, but now you clean people's dirty laundry.
The fall from grace.
To the average person, that doesn't make sense. Help us make sense of it.
Yeah, of course. It's a story that makes sense to me, living it, but probably not from the outside. But as you said, my early career was in aerospace, and as a research, design, integration, and commissioning scientist. And what that meant was designing life support systems to allow people to survive up in space, right? Recycle the water that they drink, the air that they breathe, the energy that they eat, all of this. And as you can imagine, up in space, it's a pretty closed loop. You can't crack a window for a breath of fresh air. And so we had to develop a lot of technology to take all those outputs like CO2, urine, blah, 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 and then make them into inputs, fresh water to drink, air that you can breathe. And really a lot of that toolkit for the way that we achieved that has now been applied down here on Earth to keep textiles alive. And that's what we do today.
And how did you, so we're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff, Kyle. We're going to talk about how you're Trump's biggest fan.
If that gets cut.
I know, exactly. Kyle Helbergrand, Trump's biggest fan.
I should have the MAGA hat.
I know. So we're going to talk about how, as a climate tech founder, what Donald Trump has done is affecting you, and also why we should believe you rather than Donald Trump. Because for the average person, it's like, well, he's the president of the United States. Everyone seems to be following now. We should potentially listen to him. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I really want to understand that, what it means for us as a civilization in terms of our fight against the climate, and what these policies mean for that as well. I also we will be touching on the UK tech scene and that versus the USA and the alarming trends that you're seeing right now, which I'm also seeing. So we'll discuss some of that and the flight of capital. But I wanted to, before we dive into all of that, go back to a story that most people won't know about you, which is that you almost lost your business. What was it now? About a year ago, right? In the same week that you were getting married.
That was brutal. That really was. I think, you hear the terms diamonds are forged under pressure and all this nonsense, but until, you've got to walk down the aisle, potentially penniless, looking your future wife in the eye was pretty tough. The backstory is that we had to do a pretty fast recap. The business was starting to really take off, but the finances in the company hadn't been managed as well as they should have been, quite honestly. And because of that, our new first-of-a-kind plant needed more capital sooner than we anticipated. Not more total, just sooner. And so the recap allowed us to complete the plant, get it humming, and now it's rosy, which is great. But yeah, that pinch in the middle and trying to get that recap over the line with some pretty difficult board dynamics to balance, as well as obviously your like personal, I guess you would say, ego does come into it. You know, you really want the business to succeed. You know, when it's under your purview but not your direct responsibility, it's happened. It's quite galling. But my wife now, Alexandra, was phenomenally supportive, and honestly, remember her saying to me, you know, just before we got married, the last time I saw her, the day before, I said, "Are you sure you want to go through with this? Because I might be jobless and penniless in the not too distant future." And she's like, "No, absolutely not. I'm all in through the thick and the thin," and that's something I will always be grateful for. It gave me the strength to crack on, for sure.
Yeah, I know it was a tough period, and I mean we're investors, so we saw it from the inside of the tent. But I think you handled it admirably.
That's good.
Which is kudos to you. So you've successfully navigated those choppy waters, only for Donald Trump to come into power, and he has promptly done what he said he was going to basically do.
Yeah.
He has taken a scythe to DEI budgets, DEI policy. He said that climate change is not really a thing at all. And in light of that, corporate America and basically a lot of international conglomerates have cut their DEI budgets. They've pared back on the focus around the climate. Firstly, for the average person, they might think, hang on a second, this is the US president. Maybe he's got something here, right? If everyone is actually doing what he's saying, maybe he's right. So why should we trust Kyle and not Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, look, first disclosure, I think the man is a force of nature, an astute businessman, and deserves to be in the White House, received a pretty overwhelming mandate. So for that reason, I respect him enormously. And a lot of what he does, I do believe in. I think the Doge momentum and the entire thesis behind government efficiency is obviously the right thing to do. I think the problem is that people conflate Donald Trump's anti-DE&I agenda with climate, because historically the peer groups that would champion those two things were the same. But actually what's happened is that with the DEI spiraling collapse, the kind of woke collapse in the last year or two, what we've seen is that climate's almost been dragged into that miasma as well, which is a problem. And I think because of that, people aren't focusing on the empirical data and evidence around impact funds achieving greater TVPI than non-impact funds, to the amount of capital flowing into climate tech is second only to AI still, even in the last quarter. So there's a lot of data that shows that the economy and the people of the world, 89% of which say they want to see more investment into climate, in science, but also mitigation strategies and resilience, that I think we need to break that relationship and just make sure we're talking about the two different things separately. I'm not a D&I expert by any measure, but I know a little about climate. So
D&I is the whole diversity, transgender, gender, all of that stuff.
Yes.
And then you've got climate, which is, we have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We're spoiling the planet in various different ways. And Oxwash, what you guys do, is much more relevant to this, of course.
We try to do both. I mean, we're a total meritocracy, right? And
yeah.
So we definitely do everything that we can to make sure that the opportunities in the company for promotion to recruitment is as diverse in terms of where we find applicants as possible. But it's ultimately a meritocracy, right? Like it boils down to that, which I think is the only way it can work. But for climate, it's one of the core, if not the core mission of the business. But it's certainly an emergent property of what we do.
So I want to put myself in the shoes of middle America, and they might turn around and say to you, Kyle, you're this educated middle-class guy, and you're preaching about climate, why do we know why do we know that this is actually true? You're a scientist as well. What are the facts here, and why should we believe you?
Yeah, I think when you look at the data, really it becomes very, very obvious. I think what I've learned in the last decade since leaving academia is that truth used to lie in the peer review process, and now truth really relies on communication, and that's a huge difference. I mean, there's a lot of data points from the ISPCC reports that come out every year that are very clear, very unbiased, completely, double-blind, certified that warming the planet is having a massive impact on health, economic GDP per capita, per country that's affected the most. I mean, even in the US last year, there were 89 $1 billion plus cost environmental catastrophes that occurred in the single year, and that number is only increasing. I mean, most recently the Malibu wildfires in LA, right? Which we've all heard about, but there are lots of others like the ones in North Carolina earlier in the year as well. So I think that you just have to look at the data and try and separate the morass of negativity and misinformation that social media, typically spins like a wildfire.
What was his phrase again? Drill, baby, drill.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I get energy security, right? And in a world where you're going to need more and more energy for EVs, data centers, robotics, you've got to diversify. I think, again, what he's gotten clearly wrong is that they said, we want all investment into nat gas, fracking, oil, this kind of stuff. And we're going to, de-invest and divest entirely, if they can, from renewables, when you should have both. Everybody knows you need your load taken care of from non-renewables, maybe nuclear if you can, but then the bulk of your energy supply you certainly want from renewable.
And isn't it a remarkable thing that his biggest supporter is Elon Musk, who is the symbol, he's the poster boy of the renewable revolution that's happening in the USA.
Yeah, and I mean that's Tesla's mission, right? It's to lead the decarbonization of the energy infrastructure of the planet. And it's so counterintuitive, and the backlash has been enormous. I mean, people's Teslas being burnt and everything. It's
I'm not sure that's good for the planet either.
No, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the irony of that, having a climate frenzied leftist burning a Tesla is quite astounding, but it is what it is. I think with anything in politics, it's difficult to separate these manifesto points and agendas. I mean, you see it with Robert F. Kennedy, obviously, Jr. in the health secretary position. And I think that for me personally, when you're speaking about climate, you have to try and decouple all of these other things that are going around the outside, because they pale in comparison to if we're all underwater in, half a century. And so that's why we try to remain really focused on climate mitigation.
And for the listener, what exactly does Oxwash do that is so good for the climate compared to just normal laundry?
Yeah, I think it boils down to not impacting the climate negatively. And what I mean by that is that you can imagine doing your laundry at home uses a lot of fresh water from the tap that you would otherwise be drinking, lots of energy to either move the drum, heat the water, or then tumble dry the items if you have a tumble dryer, right? And at scale, at an industrial level, that's enormous. Most industrial laundries on the planet consume a megawatt or more of natural gas per annum, just burn, baby, burn, rather than drill, baby, drill. And we just think that that's insane and it needs to change. And so Oxwash was built with the fundamental premise of, let's take these life support technologies from keeping people alive in space and apply them to textiles, recycle the water, use 100% renewable energy, distribute the laundry using EVs and HVO fleets, things like that. Some of it's obvious, some of it's proprietary tech we've had to invent, and some of it is from partners of ours that make equipment for us. But what we've been able to do is build the world's first of a kind industrial laundry plant that serves hotels, hospitals, big users of laundry and linen, and it's completely decarbonized the cleaning process and distribution, which is, a huge breakthrough. The thing that I'm most proud of is that decarbonization is an emergent property of the technology that is fundamentally better in terms of its gross margin, resilience, like the uptime of the plant is greater than a plant that runs on natural gas and whose boilers break all the time. So much like a Tesla is just a better car, and the architecture of an EV is better than an IC car, we believe that the Oxwash plants are a fundamentally better infrastructure for cleaning textiles on planet Earth.
And that's kind of lucky, isn't it? Because with the change in the mood music, as it were, as someone who is running a tech startup, tech company, you have to go out fundraise and you have to come up with narratives, and that must surely be it must be a very different world in 2025 compared to, let's say, 2023.
Yeah, enormously. I mean, the US has seen the biggest flip. I mean, impact funds and sustainability venture capital funds have really dried up pretty quickly, and you don't see many deployments happening there, unfortunately, anymore. And then Europe is now starting to be caught up in that. Initially, it was because US funds that had European outposts, like Breakthrough Energy Ventures is a good example, pulled out of the UK very quickly, in fact, out of Europe very quickly. And a lot of people started thinking, maybe impact investing isn't the hot ticket it used to be. What gives me hope is that the European zeitgeist is one of, I think, a slightly more pragmatic and empirical view than one that is completely bungled by social media and false narratives. But it's certainly something that worries me, in that we could lose 4 to 8 years of investment that we need today to offset enormous GDP impact in the next decade or two. That's the problem. The time is now.
Yeah, so let's just double click on that. So I don't think it's particularly controversial to say that what was happening before in terms of the focus on climate and in terms of trying to address this crisis has slowed. And you've got people like Mark Andreessen, who is very famous venture capitalist and former founder, and they've essentially rowed back from a lot of the stuff that they were doing, and they've taken a very different slant on it. And it does sound quite different to what he was saying before, and it's like, well, where does that come from? 2 questions for you. Maybe we deal with them in turn. One is, what do you make of corporate leaders and having to deal with such a big shift in ideology, and what should they do? And then secondly, we'll talk about what this means for us as human civilization in 20 years' time.
Yeah, I think the first is an interesting split for me, because these people have 2 distinct hats. They are human beings, with common sense, one would hope. But then they're also the CEOs or MDs of very large businesses who serve a shareholder's interest, right? And if you're looking at them through the guise of the essentially arbiter and the holder of shareholders' best interests, what they've done with the capitulation and following the Trump administration's agenda is probably the right decision, because it means that those companies can thrive under his administration. And you see it with Mark Zuckerberg, you see it with Tim Cook. They've all bent the knee.
Bezos.
Yeah, exactly. They've all paid the $1 million to the inauguration fund, bent the knee, kissed the ring down in Mar-a-Lago, and let's crack on. But they absolutely had to, right? Because going to war, with a president, as Musk saw with Joe Biden, is really difficult, and it puts you in a really dangerous position with your shareholders' interests. So I completely understand on one aspect why they've had to do it, pragmatically speaking. On the other hand, common sense for me, when I zoom out, should prevail in that it galls me that these people who are the most intelligent people on the planet don't see beyond the last term of Donald Trump into what's coming in the future. Climate investments and sustainability deep tech takes years to mature, to market, to impact, to reversing climate change. And 4 years is both a blink of an eye, but it's also at a critical juncture. I mean, I read a really interesting report that came out earlier this year that shows for every degree of warming above the 1.5 limit, is a 20% for the first 1% impact on global GDP, just wiped out.
Wow.
The 1% above that is 40, then 80, then 160. So it's exponential every degree. And if you think about that and then you extrapolate back, decisions companies make today matter exponentially in the future. And they've all capitulated straight away without any dissent. I mean, I don't know about you, but I heard no dissent in the media at all. No one put their hand up and even said, look, I respect you, but here's another perspective. It was all just, fallen on the sword and then business as usual, it was surprising to see. But, Trump certainly commands respect from those both around him and in the economy he's now controlling. So
he does. He's not a conventional president, is he? He's very happy to weaponize and do all sorts of things, which no one else is.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy because, the Biden administration weaponized the jurisprudence process in the US against Trump, right? And,
true. True.
Did loads of stuff. But it was packaged and communicated in a way that made people nod their heads and say, that makes
classy.
Sense. Yeah, but it's not. It's crazy. So I think, unfortunately, with Trump, he has some very good, obvious things that people agree with. And then when it comes to climate, I think he's just missed the data, missed the evidence, missed the outlook and the legacy he could leave, which is a shame.
What you need to do, Kyle, is meet him, I think. Because apparently the last person he meets is the policy that's last in his mind. So if you just regularly meet him,
perfect.
I suspect that's more than enough.
I would enjoy that interaction immensely.
Make America great again.
Or green again.
Hopefully. I wanted to ask Kyle, with what you just said there about what we do today has a massive impact in the future. How much of the impact that we have and how much of the fight against carbon and climate change is at the hands of the laundry industry? Like how relevant are you?
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, we're a sliver, like many industries, but it's one that is one of the hardest to decarbonize. And on a kind of per dollar revenue or per pound revenue metric of intensity, it's the second most carbon intensive industry on the planet, which is crazy. For every pound you turn over, it's just emitting, not us, but the incumbent market is emitting serious amounts of, megatons of CO2. So it's certainly something that I think is non-trivial, and we can demonstrate that. The bigger thing is water. Our industrial and commercial laundries across the globe, especially in the first world, depending on your grid, consume between 25 and 35% of all drinking water that is produced.
Oh, wow, really?
Which is not a small amount, right?
Wow.
And the bit that people don't think about is then also that the water that's used to clean in doesn't then just magically flush down the drain and get reused again. That effluent, that sewage, if you will, after the process is now incredibly toxic. It's full of chlorine bleach, microplastic, microfibers from the polyester clothing, phosphates, sulfates, sulfites, quaternary ammonium compounds, all sorts of stuff that's used in industrial processes to basically Tipex over white linen.
Wow.
And what we see in the UK, especially, and all your listeners here will know this, is that our water infrastructure is crippled. Our bills are going up. All the water authorities and companies are being fined silly money. They're just charging sewage at a historically high rate. I think last year, 25% of safe swimming spots in the UK were designated unfit for swimming because of sewage discharge in 1 year, just a 25% increase. It's crazy, So carbon is really important, don't get me wrong. But in our industry, laundry's thirsty, right? Like fresh water is another big problem. So we focus on those two things almost equally.
And is this at the heart of your conversation in the Middle East right now?
Yeah, our expansion initially was predicated on kind of the UK and then the US. But we were approached about a year and a half ago independently by 2 or 3 large hospitality operators, and actually now large private healthcare group too, that said, hey, we love what you're doing. As soon as you got your first facility up and running and we can see that it works, we'd love to collaborate on bringing the tech over to the region. Part of that, I think, is the tech itself. There is a real push for the Gulf region to be the next bastion of technology development that Silicon Valley was in the past. The last decade or couple of decades was one where software ate the world, but I think now the next decade is certainly going to be the one where decarbonization eats the world. Personally, that's my view. And so we've looked really strongly at the sector, seen how our tech will fit in, and I think the expansion to the region is imminent, which is really exciting. And we're just working out, what does that look like? Is it a JV? Is it a license? Is it a Oxwash service rolling out across the region? But yeah, I'm really, really excited for that.
It's interesting what you just said, which is, the future is this decarbonization. If you're at the cutting edge, you're at the coalface of the industry that you're in, what is the truth that you're seeing? What is the future that you're seeing in 5-10 years time that we as average people who don't necessarily have the position to be the viewpoint where you are standing, the vantage point to be able to see? What are you seeing?
It's the positivity, I think, around both 3 trends that are coalescing. The first is renewable power generation. I mean, I would almost put nuclear in this as an asterisk. I strongly believe in kind of SMR, 3rd generation, maybe now even 4th generation nuclear reactor technology, and the pebble beds and things like that. I think that that's going to be a game changer when it comes to market. But what we see in Spain, the UK...
What is that? Sorry, what is that?
So this is, nuclear historically has been the purview of these massive multi-billion pound infrastructure projects. And we see them all over the place. In the UK, E.ON runs a lot of them, across Europe too. The next generation of nuclear reactors will be much smaller and modular. Yeah. So SMR, small modular reactor.
Oh, I see. Right.
Imagine like a shipping container that can kick out half to a megawatt of clean, very, very even baseline energy that runs off thorium potentially, or the pebble bed is a non-meltdown kind of risk technology that is now started to come to market. The Chinese have a couple of them up and running. There's a few in development in the US, which is really exciting. So that's nuclear fission, not fusion. Yeah. Fusion, I think, is a little off. Yeah. But I think that what I see is that renewable energy, especially solar, is going to become super cheap, really, really cheap. And it's just falling off a cliff. I mean, to the point where if we had the land around our facility, we'd certainly be able to do a very clear, probably 18-month ROI on putting a whole solar farm around the facility and powering the thing from the sun plus a couple of batteries, like 100%, because the panels are now so cheap.
Wow.
The only thing I think could really upset is a tariff trade war, as you can imagine. But that's the first. The second is automation. I think a lot of emissions from industrial processes like ours come through inefficiencies. Things like die times, which multiply. So for your listeners, this is where, let's say you have a machine printing widgets in blue and you need to make the widget in red. Switching over the machine to go from blue to red, you imagine is an easy, not, pretty trivial task, right? But actually, in many industrial processes, those die times where you're changing the processes that take people with socket wrenches and Allen keys and things can multiply up into pretty high inefficiencies where your plant's burning gas but not producing any economics, which don't make any sense, right? So I see personally a wave of humanoid embodied AI robots augmenting workforces very quickly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 100%. This will happen in the next 5 years.
Really?
I mean, yeah, we're trialing a couple of things internally too, which are quite cool, because most industrial equipment in kind of outside of automotive and some aircraft is still very manual, with people on a line that add sequentially parts to a thing as it becomes a product or whatever the asset is at the end. And it's much easier to just take out the person and replace it with a humanoid automaton running on electricity, renewable energy, didn't need to commute to work, so it didn't get in the car as well.
Yeah.
The knock-on effects of this for decarb are massive. And it'll work the same speed, if not faster, and all round the clock. And that wave is going to be profound. And I think it will also achieve a lot more decarbonisation, where people don't have to get into their Ford Mondeo, travel an hour along the M4 to get to work. And you can imagine that at scale is going to have a big change to commuters travelling and industry in general. So I think that's something that I'm really interested in. And then I think the final one is the amount of tech that's going into your kind of retrofits of old, very carbon intensive infrastructure that is now becoming a carbon sink. So there are pretty good examples of this in mining, fracking, subsea drilling, where CO2 is being ripped out the atmosphere and then buried again. In many cases being made back into fuel underground, under pressure, which is really interesting. So I think that could speed up quite quickly if carbon markets and credits and things like that hold. I have a concern over whether the kind of carbon credit marketplace will collapse. I don't think so, with big players like Microsoft spending silly money on it. But they are certainly propping it up, but we'll see. So those three things, I think, are trends towards a rosier future than people would imagine.
There's a lot that you just said there. Let's go back to the humanoid robots, because my mind is stuck there. Why hasn't that happened yet?
It's been two limiting factors. One is the hardware, the other is the software. So the hardware element, we've had robotic multi-axial limbs for a long time, where you'll see these on automotive manufacturing lines that manipulate body parts and do welding and things like that. And usually there's 6 degrees of freedom, maybe up to 12. But humanoid robots have really struggled to get that same dexterity, but also then balance. So I don't know if you've ever watched the Boston Dynamics kind of robots on YouTube, where they started off with these kind of robot dogs that used to run around and do all sorts of things. And then they moved to the Atlas, which is the humanoid robot. It really took until the last 5 years for the actuators, gyros, motors, batteries for these technologies to actually build a person out of parts. And so that's been one. I think energy density is a big part of that. You can actually now power these things with battery packs, whereas previously it was pneumatics. In some cases, you fill them with petrol. Yeah, there's some pretty early ones with like smoke coming out the back. But then the second part of that is the software. Let's say you have this perfect automaton that is just a shell ready to go. How do you get it to go over there and do a task? And that's where traditional deterministic code, where you have to write these massive if this, then that code bases, has been the purview for the last 10, 20 years. Now with non-deterministic AI codes and models, you can build a model, an embodied AI model that allows you to put that physical intelligence into the humanoid robot. And there are companies like Pi doing this, Figure AI, obviously the Tesla Optimus is doing this as well. And that's really the breakthrough. It's being able to have a conversation with the automaton, which then has its own LLM and also a VLM, critically, inside, that allows it to then interpret what you're asking it to do. It has a foundational understanding of the world and can perform the task without having software written to do that task. If you said to the automaton, and I've seen this in San Francisco, you can speak to a robot and say, please fold this T-shirt. It's never seen a T-shirt before. It's only ever folded trousers and socks and kind of picked up stuff in the kitchen. And yeah, it goes and folds the T-shirt and slides it across.
So let's just double click on that software bit, because I get the hardware side that, look, we need more dexterity, we need more balance, even to just get this thing off the ground. But then on the software side, is the deterministic element of the software the thing that held it back? Because surely if you're trying to replace a human being on a line, then they're probably just doing a few very small, like, rote tasks multiple times. Why do you need that probabilistic kind of code in there?
Yeah, I think part of it is for those edge cases, especially in traditional manufacturing and industry, there isn't a perfect process.
Right.
There is variance, far more variance than in an automated line that you might find in a Tesla factory, for example. Now, the way that companies get around that is to train their teams to understand edge cases and then bring them back into the flow, which is where just putting an automaton with that deterministic code in will then have an error rate greater than the human. And then the ROI falls off. You can't make that business case work. There's also the element that, let's say you have a production line which has 10 different stations doing different things. If you have a deterministic robot software, you need to write software for every single step of that process. Whereas if you write one VLM model that you upload into all 10 robots, they can also then move between stations. Let's say robot 1 needs service. You can pull out robot 3 from position 4, put it into position 2, and it's fine. So for resilience and redundancy, it's much more important to have VLMs as well. It just allows you to do far more with that common hardware asset, the Humanoid. And I think that's where we'll see a game changer. And I think the first to market will probably be a company called Figure, which if your listeners Google, you'll start to see some of their tech. There are others chasing them very quickly, like Unitree, and their H1, for example, is a Chinese humanoid that we're trialing, which is super cool. And I think this will be one of the things that shocks people, how quickly this gets adopted in industry.
Do you think that this is going to have this is going to lead to job losses, right?
Certainly, yeah, or reallocation of labour for sure. It's the biggest challenge, right? Going back to the start of the podcast when you're talking about tech and DE&I, right? Like we're now talking about equal opportunities for people and automata, right? Which is a real philosophical question. And unfortunately, we live in a capitalist society where that decision is made for us by economics. If a robot is cheaper and it does the task better and is more reliable, you will buy the robot, obviously.
Do you think it will be cheaper though?
Yes, in time, definitely. I think the figure AI is probably going to cost like £25,000 a year, or $25,000 a year to lease these things. That's less than the national living wage today in the UK, right? I mean, the H1 from Unitree is like 17,000 USD today. These things aren't super expensive. The trouble is the software to get them to actually perform a task or tasks repetitively.
So we have Donald Trump, who wants to make America great again. He's bringing back industry, or he wants to bring back industry, heavy industry, to the USA. And yet, at the same time, he is he's wanting to, encourage Americans to own their tech and, all of this automation stuff. I think he'll be, very massively behind that. So you've got this automation stuff that he's encouraging. You've got the fact that, the battery technology and people like Tesla have really advanced that to get us to this point. And he wants to bring industry back. The logical conclusion of that is that industry is going to come back, but it's going to be highly automated.
Yes.
And so the very people that he was saying, we want to bring industry back so we get jobs back into this country, all of these migrants taking your jobs, that's not going to happen. Actually, that's not really going to happen,
it's in the middle, isn't it? I think, pragmatically, where historically labour in the US has been heavily migrant and migratory from the south, obviously, up through the border, and then, you typically pick up your workforce from the job lot each day, and you pick up, if you're in agriculture or in kind of middle USA manufacturing. But I think the thesis does follow that if there are American employees being prioritized that are then being leveled up with the skills to be able to run automated processes, there is a play where the average technician or employee of a heavy industry is now more a mechanic and a maintainer of the automation than the person doing the task the automation has now replaced. That, I think, will be a big wave of change, because these automata and these robots will need maintenance. They will need their software upgraded. They will need training. The reinforcement learning of these will not stop. So I think that what we will see is a complete reallocation of labor away from just mind-numbingly doing the task again and again and again to helping to manage the workforce doing that, which will be a great leveling up, I think, for human cognition in general. At least that's my optimistic view.
Yeah. Let's just think that through. So you've got a factory that has put in these robots. If you've got multiple such factories across the country, I think it's probably fair to say that there will be unemployment that increases as a result of that. And at the same time, these robots are much more cost effective, so the margins should actually go up.
Yes.
And so I think the logical endpoint of that is going to be a deepening kind of wealth inequality, or profit, whatever, however you want to think about it. So there's going to be a lot more profit. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this line of thought?
You kind of follow that rationale all the way to universal basic income, right? Where everything that we need to do to keep the economy moving is done by robots, and then we can get a basic income from the government from all of that economic output that keeps us alive, well, healthy, and stimulated. But I think that is a fallacy. I think that what you see with any new technological wave in history is that at the time, people think it's going to be the end of the economy and huge swathes of work. Exactly. And what you see is that's not the case. The typewriter putting all notaries out of jobs was across the New York Times front cover, and how that's going to have a knock on to the whole, economy. The agricultural revolution, again, same thing. The internet, the absolute biggest. I think AI and robotics is just the next one. And it's really interesting, because to try and predict what the economy and the construction of jobs and work looks like post a wave like this is always wrong. You overestimate the near term and you completely underestimate the long term of these changes. I think personally that we will see people move away from repetitive labor tasks into more cultural, high-value cognitive tasks. And we will also see a boom in the leisure industry, where people have more free time, more capital to spend in experiential ways. Hotels, restaurants, dining out, music concerts, all this kind of stuff. You're already seeing how quickly that's growing, since the COVID work from home. But people aren't commuting as much. They've got a bit of extra spare income. We're seeing a lot of domestic leisure increase dramatically. And I can see that continuing as well. And there'll be a lot of jobs in that space, definitely.
Until the automatons turn up over there as well.
Well, I think it's...
the humanoid caddy.
Yeah. No, good point. I think there's always that element of that human-to-human interaction in leisure, though. I wouldn't go on a Tinder date with an automaton. There are people that probably would, but I certainly never would in a month's Sundays. So I think there are limits to what the human condition will mean that people want to engage with. Yeah. And I think leisure, hospitality, interaction is a human-to-human interaction.
Right. So now I'm going to take off my socialist hat now and put the capitalist hat on. How are we going to be making money from this as investors? And one fundamental question I have for you is that if you were to design a new industry, new factory from scratch, you could go the Tesla route, which is just highly automated and just bespoke, right, from scratch. Try and control as many of the parts as possible, and the supply chains, or you retrofit. And the reality is, I suspect a lot of people will have to retrofit just because of budgets. But as a capitalist, as an investor, how can we make money from both trends?
It's a good question. I think from the first is that there are excellent opportunities for investing in fairly safe green infrastructure, today. Some of the best returning assets of the last decade have been in renewable energy generation, water treatment, maybe not in the UK, but elsewhere, and things of that ilk. And yeah, sure, they're not going to be the, 20x multiple on your invested capital, but they will get you a return on your investment and an IRR obviously above 15% per annum. I mean, that's the typical golden number for your impact kind of sustainable infrastructure projects, which if you're a capital allocator, isn't bad. Low risk, like high impact reward and a pretty good return. So there are lots of those. And I think they're becoming more accessible as well to both the retail investor, but also it used to be only the purview of your asset managers and infrastructure funds, then maybe your ultra high net worth family offices. But now I'm seeing a lot more opportunities for both retail investors, but also high net worth individuals investing in these infrastructure projects directly rather than through SPVs and things. So keep an eye out for that and look for those infrastructure projects. They won't look like the glitzy SaaS offerings. They don't look like that. They look very different. They are CapEx intensive, but they have great DCF, and that's what you're looking for.
Like wind turbine farms or solar panel farms and things like that.
Exactly.
Battery, farms.
100%. Yeah, I mean, there's good energy storage, infrastructure projects. There are a lot. And typically, unless they're really badly managed, they outlive their project IRR by 50 to 100% often. It's very rare that you ever see one of these projects terminate before the full project life cycle. And often they roll, which is great. And we're actually seeing, to your second question about retrofitting, some of those early projects, let's take a solar farm, for example. Let's say it's in, Morocco, in the desert. What we have seen in the last decade is the efficiency of those projects to return capital is a function of its energy production, as you'd imagine, which decreases over time as the panels age, they get dirty, they get covered in dust. There are new tech companies coming in play with like robotic cleaners that go and clean the solar panels for you, which keeps the energy generation high, keeps the capital flowing and the DCF in the project high, the IRR high as well. So we're also seeing regeneration of those first and second gen like renewable energy provisions and plants, which is really cool. I don't think anyone expected to see that. People typically say, right, 10-year project, this is how much CapEx is going in, this is our MOIC and IRR, and that's what we're going to achieve, and that's that. Not this kind of 15 to 20 year cycle where it's still printing cash, just for a modest amount of investment at that 10-year point. That's really encouraging to see. I think that for investment opportunities in retrofits, that's something I struggle to justify, honestly. Seeing what I've seen from building a plant from scratch 4 times and then working with friends in the industry that want to try and retrofit what we've done or license what we've done and then put it on top of their plant, that is really difficult. You can get maybe 10 to 15% efficiency gains doing that. But if you want to like decarbonize that infrastructure or that industrial process, you're going to have to do it from scratch because every ounce of energy input and output needs to be balanced. It's really difficult to do that after the fact. You need to design that with intent into the integration of your facility. And that's something that obviously when you're building rocketry is obvious. You don't strap the life support system on the outside. It's built into the vehicle. Yeah. And I think that's the bit that people miss. So I think that opportunities in retrofits is probably a less high IRR, I would say, but no less important. I think it should probably be done through grant funding, if I'm honest.
So if I'm an investor, I should be picking those industries that are right now highly manual, but could be reimagined to be highly automated and are large enough for the scale investment that is needed for that plant to go in to be justified.
With some inherent IP. If it's just plant A is making widgets, plant B is making the same widgets, and you're like, one of them's going to invest in automata, I'm going to invest in that plant. I think that's still high risk. If that plant making widgets has IP. Like they're the only ones that can print that circuit board. And they have the IP to do the 5 nanometer scale printing, invest, because the barrier to entry is so great for somebody else to come and try and copy that. So there's that compounding, like really defensible IP, automatable, like you said, and then also with the energy generation hat on, you're looking at, can this infrastructure project print money beyond its lifetime? At the 10-year, does it depreciate like that, or can it continue?
Yeah. What kind of industries would your top tips be? Not financial advice, but
super energy efficient chips is the one I'm really interested in, and specifically, we will start to see quantum computing becoming more mainstream. And the chips that are designed for quantum computing and for inference in AI are very specialized, specific, and in many ways are the bedrock of being able to build data centers that don't burn holes in the planet's crust through their energy consumption. So that would be something I personally find really interesting. And then the other is uranium and thorium and those technologies, mining companies as well, because like I said, with the SMR kind of nuclear wave coming, I think that owning the fuel for those reactors is going to be, really critical and high value. We saw uranium go up, I think it was 2 or 3x, don't quote me on that, last year. And the companies that are publicly traded that mine uranium, their stocks did very, very well and are continuing to do well, even despite the Trump slump. So I think those would be 2 things I'd look seriously at for sure.
Very interesting. What, as a person of industry, as a scientist, what have you changed your mind on over the last 5 years?
I think the biggest one for me is that you need to build a team of iterators. I think that initially when I started on this journey, I subscribed to the doctrine that you can bring in industry professionals that know their stuff, in our case, have run an industrial laundry plant before, whatever it is, and you just bring them in, throw your tech on top, and hey presto, you've changed the game. That's not the case. You need to hire a team that can fail fast, learn fast, and iterate fast. And only then do you make real significant innovation happen. I think that's something that you only really learn through experience once you've tried the let's hire in the industry pros and they sink. Occasionally you find a golden nugget that is still willing to learn, comes with experience, but they're flexible, and also tech literate. There's this huge gap that we see between the tech available to run industrial plants and the people that have run industrial plants and they can't jump that tech literacy chasm. It's really scary. And so you have to properly level people up to be able to use data dashboards, to be able to understand how to do an SQL query, how to visualize work in progress, how to understand KPIs. Like, it sounds basic, but actually what we've found is that people in the industry are so used to something just running like clockwork that they lose sight of the wood for the trees and they just become the automata that may well replace them one day. And so that's been a real learning, is find people that are tech literate and can iterate fast, really fast. And they're not easy to find.
As someone who is, from the same university as myself without, we're very lucky, we're frankly quite middle class. And a lot of the people that we interact with are from the middle classes, professional sector, service, that kind of sector. And in the line of work that you are in, you actually have to bridge both, divides, where you have the blue collar worker and you've got the white collar worker who are working side by side. How have you found that?
Better than expected, honestly. I mean, with intent, when we built the plants, we integrated the teams. We made sure that even small things like the space where we all hang out at lunch is the same space. It's not compartmentalized. The office and the operations are side by side. And we've always, and I learned this from my time at SpaceX, had operations, design, and obviously implementation deeply coupled and very close to one another. And again, you have to do that with intent. I think lots of people fall into the trap where they have plant or industry over here, and then the tech separated and then applied to it, almost like separate, in many cases, separate entities. And that doesn't work. You have to be deeply coupled. I think that we're really lucky. Our both blue and white collar workforce are heavily motivated by what we're doing. They have great work ethics, and we do triage for that. We certainly are very picky with our team members, but it means that I think we've been able to set a culture pretty early on of high agency, high accountability, but ultimately a team that is providing more than the sum of the parts, which is something I'm really proud of. But it's taken a lot of investment and time to doing that, and you never stop. It's like my number one job is talent density and keeping that increasing.
As a scientist, what has changed in your view of science from your PhD days to where you are today as a CEO?
Yeah, I think the biggest one has been the fall of the expert since COVID, right? We've all seen it in the news where scientists before the pandemic were seen as the people that knew the most about their subject matter, which is what they are. That is what a PhD is by definition, or a professor that studies something is meant to be. But in the public opinion, experts no longer hold that sway. There's a significant distrust of a professor, Smith on the TV that's telling you about something. I mean, I just read an article that apparently 42% of Americans think that when they hear an expert, they're telling you the exact opposite of the truth. Not just like a slight fabrication or like blurring, the exact opposite. And that public confidence is having a massive knock-on effect into people entering science, into going through the academic ladder, through grant funding. A lot of deep research in universities is funded by the government. And in the US, especially with DOGE, we are seeing that cut. I mean, I've seen friends that work at NASA still. I've been sat next to them in California when they get the DOGE message saying, hey, your charge card's been frozen until further notice because we're reviewing your grant. And this person who runs multiple successful labs across multiple NASA bases is like, what? I can't even buy reagents to do experiments anymore. It's crazy. So we are seeing a real sluggish kind of decline in the velocity of core deep research because of that, I think. And I see it with friends that are leaving academia in spades. They're spinning out startups, they're going to work for corporations, they're going to pharma, all of this kind of stuff. So that's been a really interesting learning for me since COVID, is that people don't trust the experts as anywhere near as much as they used to.
Have you ever had any exposure to China? I mean, I don't know, maybe you don't, but...
Not really, in all honesty. I mean, read about it in these. We procure some of our infrastructure and our machinery from China. We have very specialist pieces of industrial kit that we design that get manufactured there for us and then shipped over. And it's actually really good stuff, I'm not going to lie, it's great. They do a fucking good job. They're really, really good at their art. So that's really our only exposure at the moment.
They've gone and won the Snooker World Championship yesterday as well.
Congratulations to them. Yeah. I did see that. First time in history.
I think so, right? Yeah, that's right.
A Chinese person's done that.
It's the beginning of the end. The Brits put forward 3 people in their 50s, and there was one younger guy, and then the Chinese just won it.
Well, you have a pool table here. Maybe,
we do, I know.
Maybe you need to send a few extra sets on that.
I know, we need to win back the pride of Britain again.
Yeah.
The reason why I ask is I wonder if that is a really important trend that is going to have really long-term implications. Because I don't know, my instinct is the Chinese are probably not the same. I have no idea. It's a completely different economy, different culture as well, different society. But my instinct is that there's a lot more deference for authority, and my instinct is they probably are not treating experts in the same way that we are today here. And all of the knock-on effects on the funding that you're talking about. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll caveat this by saying I'm totally naive to that economy and that culture. I've never been. I would love to, absolutely love to. But from the outside looking in, which take it with a pinch of salt, I think that what you see really changing dramatically with the Chinese tech space is that long have people in the West thought that the Chinese are phenomenal imitators. You know, they're excellent at taking something that we innovate in the West and then grabbing that IP and saying, cool, thanks for that. I'm going to go make it for a quarter of the price and sell it back to you. And we go, brilliant, thanks so much for that. You know, and that has been the last, 30 years or so. What we're seeing now is that they're moving away from just pure play imitators to innovators. You know, we've seen it with the DeepSeek R1 model, which, yes, was definitely trained on OpenAI, but then also was better than it. We see it with, like I've mentioned, the Unitree Robotics, the H1, phenomenal robot. Probably
electric cars,
exactly.
solar panels.
BYD, BYD is a good example. You know, it's a Tesla killer if they're not careful. I mean, I know as a Tesla shareholder that the investment in that company is for the Optimus, right? It's for the humanoid robot. And the robocabs. That's where the value comes from. Not selling EVs, I don't think. But you're right. They have a lot of homegrown high-tech companies with better products. You know, BYDs are, dare I say, a damn good car. You know,
yeah. I'm thinking of buying one actually.
Yeah.
Affordable as well.
Exactly, and that's the point, right? You know, they've turned the corner and flipped the script. They're not just imitating; they're innovating, and I think that means that the West is panicking. We see it with the Trump tariffs. What was it, 165% tariffs, I think? The moment that basically shuts off all trade with China, that's absolutely non-critical. Like, we know that because the margins, anything you're importing are only ever going to be as good as 40%, probably. So it's a notional just trade cut-off, apart from maybe pharmaceuticals. And so it's a knee-jerk reaction, right, to try and disrupt this dependency on the West. The problem is China has spent decades building up its infrastructure to be able to deliver this amount of production and innovation now at scale. You know, the BYD plant that they're building in China is as big as San Francisco, the city. Not the Fremont Tesla car factory nearby, the city. It is massive. And to build that kind of size of infrastructure in the US or the UK
can't do it.
Is prohibitive. The amount of regulation, red tape, honestly, we had so many stupid headaches with building a modest-sized, laundry plant that was meant to lead the industry into the future, with someone trying to charge us for the rainwater falling on the roof, to all sorts. It was crazy. Just come on, grow up. This is insane.
Perfect time to talk about the UK. What's happened? Where have we gone wrong? I mean, I feel like this is at the heart of so many it's emblematic of what's wrong with the UK.
Yeah.
Where it's obvious. A lot of the stuff that we need to do is really obvious. Mm-hmm. And actually the government know that it's obvious as well. And they want to try and do it.
Yeah.
But we've just backed ourselves into this kind of corner, legal, political, competing interest corner, where we can't seem to get out of it. And we've not been able to get out of it for 20 years, whilst everyone else has just streaked past.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's similar to what's happened in the US, right? We're just probably 4-year cycle behind, but maybe a little less. But you're right. And I think it boils down to I think about this a lot, to the confidence of the British public that Britain can execute on the world stage. I think that there's been a decoherence of the English national spirit, the pride in what Britain can produce. And that degradation has only amplified. I mean, we see lots of companies that start here. People have been... The British educational system is phenomenal, especially in higher ed, phenomenal. But what we see is those people that should then really be building businesses, employing people, leveling up the GDP per capita, are just getting their education and then poof, flying over to somewhere with better prospects, And 35% of under 30s that were surveyed last quarter said they're considering leaving the UK in the next 2 years. 35%, a third of under 30s.
If we're not careful, we could end up with a real brain drain that starts to look similar to, a population level decline like you would see in Japan, right? If you're looking at the replacement rate per educated person in the UK, I would say we're below 1 at the moment.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are more people leaving than there are people coming. And I think the data would support that. And it will certainly flush through. And that worries me. And I think it does come down to needing the confidence back. That is a mixture of government, media, and leadership. Usually you would put leadership and government in the same bucket. But what we've seen is that business needs to lead. Trump is a businessman. Elon Musk is a businessman. These are business people. And I think that the UK doesn't have many good business people in government. There are exceptions to that. James Timpson, who obviously ran and his family built the Timpson's cobblers and all of those chains and things and others, is now in the government, and he's phenomenal. Like, that man is a powerhouse and his moral compass is steadfast, but he's pretty unique. There are a lot more business leaders that are flocking to the Reform UK movement. And we just saw in the local elections a landslide for that party. What that represents is a cultural upswelling where the British people have had enough of the status quo of the two-party system, and they want significant change, just like the US did with the massive mandate that Trump got. We're seeing the same thing. I would not be surprised if there's a new Reform Party in government in the UK at the next general election. I would put money in that poly market. I'd take the over on that. Definitely over 50% chance for that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the country does need. I mean, look, they have some policies I flat outright disagree with. Climate being one of them. Usually it's a common theme.
Oh, really? Is that a thing?
Yeah, they're not super hot on climate, which is a real shame. It looks like they kind of took Trump's manifesto, scribbled out the title and put Reform UK. Instead of make, America great again, it's make Britain
Great Britain great again.
It's a tongue teaser, isn't it? So I think there needs some work there. But it is a short and very emblematic representation of how people want change. This party that did not exist before has now had a landslide victory in local elections, and that will come through in the general election, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's. I think you make a whole bunch of really interesting points there. I think part of this is also there's so many different divides that are set against each other at the moment. You've got the rich and the poor, and by poor we mean most people at this point.
Yeah,
and then you've got migrants and the in particular I think the older white community who vote, and I think that there's a lot of tension there. Then you've got young and old, right? Where again you've got and I think there's a lot of people on this side who who are very opposed to the other side. So you've got the young are really struggling with the way the house prices are, the way that jobs are, the way that inflation has been, and you just quoted this survey where they want to leave the country. Very understandable, but you can't have all of those things happen and have a successful country, and I think that really worries me.
Yeah, it's compounding, right? Over time. Yeah, and I think when you say those things, what really strikes me for what you said is that a lot of that boils down to having better moral values, respecting your elders, treating other people how you want to be treated yourself. Like those tenets that I'm sure we were both probably brought up with and in place in our lives seems to be lacking somewhat.
Hard work.
Yeah, that's a cracking one. High agency and grit. I mean, what I'm always struck by when I travel the world, especially to the US and come back here, is the level of grit in that country compared to here is just outrageous. So much higher at every level, whether it's blue, white collar, whatever you do, it's just a level up. And if you imagine, even if it's only 5% better on that scale and that compounding improvement up through a workforce into GDP per capita, it's enormous, right? And it comes down to confidence. Like, why work hard if I have no prospects? It takes a very unique type of person to go, screw the numbers, I'm going to be an outlier. And I think that we need to build more outliers that then people follow, because those outliers are the people that create jobs, create massive industries, create change, create economic prosperity. And we need those people to stay in the UK.
Yeah.
You know, the number of founders and exited, founders and investors leaving the UK is the highest it's been for a decade, right? It's crazy. So, and it doesn't show any signs of slowing.
And so let's talk a little bit about that, because we're venture investors, amongst other things as well. And one thing that we have found is that we invest in companies, and very soon after, you find that they've repatriated to the USA in particular, and they've set up a Delaware Corp, and they're raising money from US investors.
Yeah.
And they're just finding that it's much easier to sell into the US. It's much easier to raise money in the US. It's a much larger market in the US as well. So it almost seems like a no-brainer to pitch your tent there and fight that particular battle.
Yeah.
Than here.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of companies in the venture space, they are those type of companies that can pick up and move. They are SaaS platforms. They are in the domain of bits, not atoms. We're the other, we're in the hybrid in between the two. But for most startups, they are software. And because of that, they can pick up and go. And like you say, the US capital markets are massive and far more risk taking. The UK, Europe are totally risk averse, and you're nodding because I think you understand this from the deployer's side, but from the actuation of that capital side is eternally frustrating when we're not I'm not a particularly good entrepreneur, but I see excellent ones and I'm like, why are you not letting them cook? Like, they are killing it. Just put the money in and they are going to, multiply that significantly. And there's always oh no, we're not sure about this, that and the other. I'll tell you a story. I have a friend, I won't name him, but he's got this startup that is going to completely break the fourth wall, interacting sports personalities with their fans.
All right.
Really, really cool product, really cool platform, immaculately designed. And it's just going to market soon with a very famous footballer, the most followed sports personality in history on social media, and went to a US VC who said, I've run the numbers, and if you convert only 1% of that sports personality's followers to your platform to follow them through that instead, you'll break even with and make a 40% net profit margin, 1% of 1%, and say, take my money. Like, you're obviously going to be able to do that. UK investor comes along and says, we're not sure you'll be able to convert any. And so we're out. Why would they switch? It's like better product, deeply integrated into their scheduling. Well, there's lots of reasons it's a better product than X or Threads or something like that. And you just think that perspective is so wrong. So I think that a lot of entrepreneurs just are sick of it. They're like, why would I put up with this? I've got high agency, high grit, and I'm determined to make a success of myself and improve my prospects. But then they, disappear overseas. I mean, I wouldn't sit here today and say I haven't been, tempted myself, for sure. I think our way of achieving that is through global domination. Then we're in all markets, so it's great. But yeah, it's really profound, and we've got to stop that brain drain as fast as possible.
You layer on the tax implications, where founders who've had success are being punished effectively as a result of that. I worry about UK PLC right now.
You're right, because it's a network, right? And it's cyclical. You have a founder that exits, makes a great multiple. What do? Typically invest in excellent venture funds, such as your own, that then deploys it to the next generation, right? Or maybe they start writing tickets directly themselves. Like, that's how the ecosystem functions. Venture isn't propped up by pension funds and hedge funds and things like that. It's usually venture capital from founders that have exited and been successful. Usually.
Yeah.
I think the vast majority.
And like, some of the big success stories of our country, like people like Revolut. If you actually, and don't quote me on this, but my understanding is that a number of these founders very rationally have decided to move abroad.
Yeah.
Because they're bigger markets, it's much more tax friendly, it's a lot more permissive towards risk taking. I mean, if you look at the way that someone like Revolut has been treated by our regulators and by our the powers that be over the last decade, whilst they've been the biggest shining light from UK fintech. It beggars belief. It's crazy.
I completely agree. And actually, there's a great article. Maybe it was a blog post written by the Revolut founder about this and how he sees the brain drain even in his own organization, let alone wider. And I think regulations it's a dirty word. It's an interesting word, isn't it? I think we all know there's too much, and often it's convoluted and it's entwined and difficult to pick apart, and to kind of thread the needle is a nightmare. I think we certainly need to see profound deregulation. I think what frustrates me is that I do believe the Labour government understand that. Speaking with people in that government, they get it. It's just effecting the change seems to be incredibly sluggish, like silly sluggish. In the US, you see executive orders being signed by the 100 a day, just regulation gone.
Text message to your friend.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it, game over.
Yeah, I mean, they did this incredible thing last week where they, in an EO, signed that said, if you build a manufacturing plant, or actually we kind of fit into this as well, in the US, all of your losses and investment for the first, I think it's year or 18 months, you get back as just a tax rebate.
That's all right, isn't it?
It's like it completely changes the IRR of investing in building a plant in the US like that. Yeah. Wasn't in the news at all. But yep, deregged, like this whole thing, brilliant. And you just don't see that at all in the UK. I can't think of any deregulation that has been meaningful since the Labour Party took over. And you would expect some red tape to be cut, but it's not, right?
Yeah. To be fair to them, I think they have identified the red tape.
Yeah.
They have the scissors out. They've got the scissors out, and they've possibly even tried, but it's a thicker red tape here, I think. Where they're like, ooh, just not getting through.
Yeah.
And then someone's like, stop doing that. We're going to take you to the courts for even trying. And then they're like, okay, fine, we'll go over there.
Yeah, and you need the bravery to say, get out my way. Like, we'll talk about it in the courts later, but right now I'm cutting that red tape, which is what we see elsewhere. I mean, Argentina is a great example of how this can work really well. I mean, he's a controversial figure, but Milei has managed to turn that country around dramatically through deregulation. It's been phenomenal to see the change in their economic output. And I just really want to see that happen in the UK as well. I believe it can. I genuinely do. I think, like I said, there are very high density innovation hubs in the UK that churn out very, very intelligent and impressive people that need to start businesses that drive economic growth. We cannot keep letting them flee. It's got to stop.
Yeah, agreed. Kyle, I want to ask you very shortly about your visit to Pakistan, which is where I was born. So we're going to get to that in a second. But I wanted to ask you one final, water diviner kind of question, which is, what's one trend that will feel obvious in 5 years that sounds crazy today?
5 years, is that kind of not too far in the future?
10 years. 10 years then.
10, excellent. That's easier. Much easier. So today, this is a bit of a way out there one. So
we like those. We like those.
Yeah. Should have had one less coffee. But my firm belief is that the bandwidth limitations of the way we communicate as human beings is about to be completely blasted open. And what I mean by that is you and I are having a conversation and we're speaking and conveying information through sound. And we can also do that if we're sat typing to each other. That's incredibly slow. Computers think in, light years faster in comparison. It's my firm belief that human-computer augmentation is going to be mainstream in the next 10 years. And you start to see it with companies like Science, Neuralink, that are building these brain-computer interfaces. And some of the early breakthroughs with Neuralink have been astounding. People being able to just think something and then the computer does it. Like, you can imagine what that's going to do to the speed of information transfer, obviously communication, human to human and human to machine. I think in 10 years' time, there will be a meaningful percentage of the population that have got some level of integration with the internet direct to brain of some kind. That is my out there thing that I think people will think you're talking crap, and in 10 years' time they'll look back and be like, oh yeah, no, you're right. Because if you said 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, that we'd all have these supercomputers in our pockets, you'd go, nah, that's not a thing, like the tricorder from Star Trek, right? And then here we are, right?
It's very true.
So that would be my bet.
I'll have a think about that. Very good. If you know any top startups,
yeah,
let us know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a fascinating field of neuroscience, right? Both reading and writing. That's the interesting bit that I find fascinating. I mean, there's a company called Science in the Valley that is doing this, where they grow neurons into your brain from the chip. So it basically augments with your own cerebral structure, like in the space around your neurons, like a mesh.
Yeah.
And then they can read those signals, which is fascinating.
I guess the writing must be the hard part, right?
Yeah, where you then try to change the stimulation of the neurons and the dendrites and things. And that's more what Neuralink is trying to do as well, because they have electrodes embedded in your brain, which then can fire, obviously, energy in to write and trigger neurosynapsal release.
Wow. So we could, maybe not in 10 years, but maybe we could see a Matrix style where he's like, I know Kung Fu. And he's just been downloaded into his head.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that is coming, is that singularity where the virtual world that you're interacting through a brain-computer interface is indistinguishable from real life. And that's terrifying. Because if that's true, how do we know we're not already in that simulation?
Yeah.
Right?
And then if we rewind back half an hour in this conversation, you've got the humanoid robot.
Yeah. Now you get it.
And then, so you've got the humanoid robot on one side, BYD, and then you've got Freddie from, a working class estate who's now been, human, what's it called? Chip integrated, enhanced.
Yep.
And now he's actually, pitting himself up against BYD's humanoid robot. And actually it's a pretty even fight.
That is a big ticket event. In Madison Square Garden.
I know. Or on the Oxwash facility.
Yeah.
Who should I hire? Hard to decide.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, human enhancement would have been my other answer to that, which is like the genetic engineering of the human form and blah, blah, blah. But I think that already is happening, with all sorts of companies that you see doing it. Like the Enhanced Games is obviously, bringing to market the alternative to the Olympics, where all enhancements legal, do what the hell you want, as long as you're safe and healthy, we don't care, but go for it. And they're breaking records behind the scenes already, which is really exciting, world records by significant margins. So I think that human enhancement is another one that we'll see in 10 years' time being completely mainstream.
So Kyle, you took an unexpected turn and ended up in Pakistan, Karachi, right?
Yeah.
What was that all about?
So we have been designing our own line of linen and towels and things like that to rent to customers. And actually at scale, that's how the industry works, is we own the linen and we rent and clean it for customers.
Oh, right.
It's not that they own it. That's got a common misconception. And to do that, we needed to find suppliers that could manufacture high volumes of high quality, got certified organic cotton, blah, blah, blah. Ended up with 2 Karachi plants, one doing towels, one doing linen that we've partnered with. But obviously, because of our B Corp status, SEDCO procurement protocols that we have to follow, we needed to do a due diligence visit to go check these plants. No child labour, obviously healthy working conditions, living pay, all of these kind of things. So that was the reason I was there a little over a month and a bit ago. Yeah.
How was it?
I thought it was it. I like Karachi. People are so hospitable, really, really lovely. Like we were treated like royalty. It was amazing. People are really proud of that city. We got from multiple different people how much they wanted to showcase the city, take us around, show us the history, even little things as well about, where the US embassy was during the Iraq or Afghanistan war, and the fact there's a landing strip inside the compound and all this kind of stuff, which I had no idea, right? Which is fascinating. And I think that hospitality is something I've never experienced before. The only other place I've kind of been exposed to it a little is in, very high-end US establishments, but it was across the board in Karachi. So I like that. Obviously, there are big socioeconomic divides, like enormous. But I mean, I grew up in South Africa a little bit, so I'm not, unfair with that. And it's difficult to see. But you can see a lot of development in Karachi too. I think its proximity to the Gulf is not helping that, which is good to see, really good to see. You see quite a few hospitality operators jumping across the water and setting up over there, which is really, really exciting. So it was a good eye-opening experience, and the plants that we visited were great. It was better than expected, which was really good.
Do you think you're going to do some deals in Karachi then?
We actually have right now 8 trucks driving from Karachi to Swindon. Well, because the tariff debacle has just completely upended shipping. Even trying to get ships into Southampton, the delays are massive because quite a few of them were kind of heading across to China or going to the US, and then the tariffs come in and they're like, let's divert, go to Southampton and try and offload the goods and sell them here instead, right? So that's quite common. So we decided it was quicker and not that much more to truck the goods from Karachi up through Iran, Turkey, all the way through Europe to Swindon. And I can track them on my phone right now.
Yeah, what's that all about? Is it AirTag business?
Yeah. So I was worried that this was the first time we've ever done this. Are we going to fill these trucks up with our brand new product that's RFID chips, it's our own spec, it's pretty bougie, it's lush, it's a great product, really, really good, I would say so myself. And it's just going to disappear in the middle of Turkey or Iran or something. I'm just like, great.
Just loads of towels.
Yeah, or just sold out the back of the truck, right? Even if it is bonded. And so I put an AirTag in one box of each of the trucks so that we can just track it on its journey across Europe. So while we're talking, I can show you where they are. But it's useful, it just brings it to life, and we just feel a little bit more in touch, I guess, with our supply chain that way, rather than just kind of hoping and praying that this stuff is going to turn up when we think it is. So, that's where we are at the moment.
Very interesting. So are they all traveling in a convoy then?
Yeah, kind of one behind the other. Yeah, they're kind of making their way slowly across. You can see the 2 trucks there.
Oh, wow. So they're in Iran at the moment.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So just tracking them. That was 7 minutes ago. It's on the Payambar Azam freeway in Iran. There you go.
Fantastic. And that's going to end up, in a NHS facility somewhere at some point?
These ones will end up in, hopefully, all hospitals and all hotels, especially kind of mid to high end in the UK. That's the plan, for sure.
Wow.
Starting with the hotels.
Incredible. Kyle, it's been an absolute pleasure. We've covered an incredible amount of ground.
Yeah.
I think the whole idea behind these podcasts on this channel is to unravel the thread, the preconceived notions and the preconceived articulation of the world around us, threads, and leave them slightly unraveled and fraying at the edges so that we can once again think about how do we join them together again, taking into account your information in a way that makes more sense of the world and perhaps shows us a better future. So thank you for that.
Perfect. I feel frayed. Thank you. No, it's really enjoyable. Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure.